I pay homage to Urgyen Sangharakshita, to his teachers, the Buddha Shakyamuni, Aryatara, the holy Manchu Gosha, and the rest. This topic of sadhana is a vast one, it's profound, and it's multifaceted. And this morning I will try to show just a little of it. It'll be possible to explore it more in the groups over this weekend. And I'm so aware that there is as much experience of sadhana as there are dharmacharis in this room. And that's not only a lot of dharmacharis, but a lot of experience. And in many cases for many, many years and even many, many decades. So our collective experience is great, and I'm going to contribute something, I hope. I was up at 6:15 this morning, rewriting parts of my talk, as just for so many of us, this has been a very, very full week. And because of that, I'm going to read fairly carefully, at least in parts, from what I've written, so that it all follows, rather than too much just trying to ad lib. But I was also thinking that I spent between 6:15 and I think 8:15 working on my talk. And I thought, well, actually, that was my sadhana. Really, that was my sadhana. And that is one of the points that I hope to bring out, that sadhana, it's not just meditation practice. It's not just visualization practice, although actually in this talk, especially, yes, in a way, the both parts of my talk, I will be talking a lot as though about what we do in meditation, but also I will mention this from time to time, and I would like to ask you to bear in mind that probably everything I say about what we do in meditation, we also can and need to do in the rest of our lives in order to really make sadhana sadhana. I'll come back to that point in a moment. Last Saturday morning I was with Bhante for one of the regular secretarial times I have had over the last few years with Bhante, especially on the weekends. And this was just 3 days before he died, and it was almost exactly at this time. It was around about 10 o'clock actually, last Saturday. And he wanted to keep his secretarial work going. He asked me what new correspondence there was. It was obvious he was not feeling at all well, and we did talk about that, although as others who were with him then in the annex at the time, he seemed very well in himself. And he seemed completely, definitely, without anxiety, without worry at all. Just completely equanimous, but he hadn't been eating much actually over those previous 3 days, a few days, and he told me that, and he wasn't feeling so well. But he wanted to continue as normal, and there wasn't much correspondence. So I told him what there was. He wasn't up to writing anything, of course. And so then I told him about this weekend coming up. I said, Bhante, we're going to be spending a weekend, or a men's order weekend, next weekend, dedicated to sadhana. I hadn't, although this had been planned back in August, for some reason I hadn't mentioned this to him earlier. And I told him also that we had decided to play the recording of him leading the Green Tara Sadhana in Cambridge in 2009. And I asked him if he remembered doing that, leading that. And he said that he most definitely did. And what he said was that he remembered particularly how completely still the room was for an hour. That's what he remembered. So we're going to meditate this afternoon on this weekend, listening to Bhante's voice, which is on Free Buddhist Audio, at least for order members. And then there was a question I wanted to ask him about his leading of the sadhana, which I had practiced over the previous a couple of times during that week. I didn't know it was there. Satyaraja had informed me, and I practiced it. It was very, very good to practice with Bhante in that way. But there was a question I had, and although I could see he wasn't, I knew he wasn't so well, still I decided to ask him the question. And the question was that I was puzzled because in the way that Bhante leads the sadhana, as you'll see this afternoon, although he asks us to see the lotus and the moon mat and the seed syllable of green tara, the tongue, he doesn't say anything about green tara herself beyond that. He doesn't say how she looks, nothing like that. So I was puzzled, and I asked him about that. And as so often, I have found anyway with Bhante, he didn't answer the question quite in the way I expected. He gave a different answer. The answer was this, something like almost exactly these words. He said, well, the heart of green tara, it may be inside or it may be outside. It's the same thing. That's what he said. And he told me it is the same in a way that came across, I was thinking how to put it, as though to him it was just so matter of fact. It was so obvious, and also with such conviction, and I felt this is just what he knew. It was just so obvious. The heart may be outside or inside, it is the same thing. And he went on to say that the figure that we see before us is like looking into a mirror. That's what he said. It is us. It's like looking into a mirror. If it's outside, it's like looking into a mirror. But it's the same thing, outside, inside. Actually, subsequently, I have asked one or two others who are familiar with the green tara, who remember Bhante leading the sadhana, and that is how he led it. Although if you look at the sadhana as passed from Chetra Rinpoche, I think all the sadhana says is to identify oneself with green tara. And again, as I'll go back to a little bit, the seed syllable, for any of the seed syllables, for any of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, is the Bodhisattva or Buddha, and that's how we're to understand. So I think that was what Bhante was taken for granted, does take for granted when he leads the green tara sadhana, even when he practices it. It's very, very good that Bhante did leave us this green tara sadhana leading in his own voice. Not least because, as we know, this was the first sadhana that he took up. He's written about this in Precious Teachers. In 1957, he met Chetal Sangye Dorje. And after quite a conversation between them, which you can read about in Precious Teachers, Bhante came to a place where he felt complete confidence in Chetal Rinpoche. And therefore he asked Chetal Rinpoche who was his tutelary deity, who was his yidam, his protector. And Bhante describes that after just reflecting for a little while, Chatra Rinpoche said, "Green Tara, as for so many." In fact, I think Bhante says that Chatra Rinpoche said, "As for so many teachers of the past, it was for Bhante, Green Tara." And Bhante talks about why in Precious Teachers, and more recently in I think it's a writing this year, Green Tara and the Fourth Lakshana, why he asked this question. Because before that, in Bhante's spiritual practice, both in Kalimpong and before that, mindfulness of breathing had been his main practice. He talks about it as being his kind of, can't remember the exact word, but it was like his linchpin, the mindfulness of breathing. So why did he ask this question? And that's because he had come to understand, initially through his friendship with the Parsi mystic Dr. Dinshaw Mehta, that one could get beyond the ego by opening oneself to the transcendental influence of one or another of the transcendental beings who, and this is from the Precious Teachers, were, quotation, different, infinitely various aspects of the Buddha's Dharmakaya, or body of truth. So, through Chatra Rinpoche, he came to understand that by devotion to Tara, in Bhante's words, by becoming her, in Bhante's words, he could most readily gain access to the transcendental realm to which she belonged. So from 1957 onwards, this form of practice became an essential part of Bhante's spiritual life. And later on in that year, with the recommendation of Khatchu Rinpoche, who he had come to know, he approached one of the very, very great teachers within the Tibetan tradition of the 20th century, Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, to request the Manchu Gosha initiation. Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, of course, died only 2 years later. So that's one of the many remarkable events in Bhante's life, that he has given us this connection with Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche. And when it was arranged, it turned out that Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche gave Bhante 4 initiations into 4 figures, including Manchu Gosha. And Bhante writes about that initiation. You might remember he had a tremendous toothache. He was in physical pain, but presumably, or no doubt in another way, it just did not take away at all from his receptivity. And Bhante writes, above all, I'm just going to read this, above all, I remember the rapt, beatific expression with which he, that is Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, looked up as he invoked the bodhisattvas whose wonkas he was conferring upon me. It was as if he actually saw the diaphanous, rainbow-like forms floating in the air before him. So I want to go back a little bit to what do we mean by sadhana, and what do we mean by yiram. Generally, in the order, we do use this term to refer to the practice of contemplation of a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva taken up at ordination. However, as I already indicated right at the beginning, it has a broader meaning as a spiritual practice that leads to the goal. And for sadhana to be fully sadhana, we need to see it encompass the whole of our lives, to permeate our whole culture, to create a Dharma culture. And that is what sadhana does do, can do, and will do for us. In tantric terms, the Buddha or Bodhisattva is the yidam as the esoteric refuge for the Dharma. So here, reading from Creative Symbols of Tantric Path to Enlightenment, a lecture series, based on a lecture series that Bhante gave, I think in 1972. The whole of the Dharma, talking about the yidam, the whole of the Dharma is contained, embodied. And you direct all your attention to that. You don't bother too much about scriptures, studies, teachings, doctrines. The center of your attention, spiritually speaking, is occupied by the figure of the yidam. And you devote yourself to becoming familiar with that figure. For you, your yidam is the whole Dharma, the whole teaching distilled into a single figure which you become, with which you become spiritually intimate, and into whom or into which you are incorporated. And now I want to talk a little bit about the discussions over the last several years, kicked off really by the conversations between Bhante and Subhuti in 2010, 2011, and leading to the papers Reimagining the Buddha and Initiation into a New Life. I want to say enough, hopefully, to contribute to some clarity about where we are with this now. I think we have been through a process in the last few years, and not only I think that, but I've discussed this with quite a few others in the college and elsewhere. As we know, Bhante never saw sadhana for us in the context of tantric initiation. For us, the introduction takes place in the context of ordination and effective going for refuge, with all that this implies. I saw this powerfully at Guhyaloka in September on our 1-month ordination retreat. I saw the significance for the 12 who were ordained of the preparation for ordination being also a preparation for sadhana. And I saw how joyful they were when they took it up. At the same time, the initiations Bhante received from his Tibetan teachers and the contacts with them is clearly very important for us. The element of lineage, which gives a sense of continuity with our preceptors to Bhante, to his teachers, and on back into the roots of the Buddha Dharma in India. And these are all related to the initial ordination. I'll come back to that. So, the initiations that Bhante received from his Tibetan teachers and the contacts with them is clearly very important for us. The element of lineage, which gives this continuity. So hence, for example, Bhante wishing that sadhana retreats be held here at Adhisthana. And they have been. And these will become even more important now, whether at Adhisthana or elsewhere. They are a means of unifying us at the deepest possible spiritual level, with Bhante and with each other. And I believe this unification will be helped because, especially over the last maybe 2 or 3 years, Bhante was emphasizing to the college that most new order members at ordination take on a practice from a relatively small pool of meditations on Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Often those that Bhante himself had practiced, though not exclusively. I don't think his thinking here was new, but the emphasis was, and the emphasis was not so much at the time of reimagining the Buddha, an initiation into a new life. Although, if we look at Buddhophony, that kind of short addendum to reimagining the Buddha, Bhante very clearly says, for those for whom the current way of practicing sadhana is working, they had their full encouragement to continue. But the emphasis in his last 2 or 3 years that Bhante placed and asked us to place on practicing the sadhanas, either that he had received, or for example, or particularly from the end of the Sevenfold Puja, and a few others that presumably you know, Vajrasattva, for example, was particular emphasis, which I think is and will be very, very helpful to us. Bhante wrote about this in his piece Green Tara and the Fourth Lakshana, which he completed on New Year's Day 2018. And he continued this theme in 2 further pieces written in January, The Bodhisattvas Are Also Necessary and Rainbows in the Sky. Beautiful, beautiful pieces of writing. However, going back to reimagining the Buddha and initiation into a new life, an approach to sadhana was put forward that could be tailored to each individual. That could rely less on the traditional images and the traditional forms. And there was quite a lot of discussion about this in Preceptors meetings, and no doubt in the order as a whole, how this might best be done at the time of ordination. And although this certainly worked well for some, I think it is true to say that we have found at ordination that most preferred to take up the written sadhanas, but not slavishly. And this was always the case. Bhante always asked us to use our imagination, and there was always flexibility in how we practice within the traditional forms, because how can there not be? Because once they come to life, they're going to come to life. And I think that this is the case whether the original sadhanas or the so-called simplified ones. I think it's worth pointing out that several of the sadhanas that Bhante himself received are quite simple. The Green Tara sadhana is really a very good example of that. And even the more complex are very simple compared to most sadhanas found in the Tantra. And I, in my view, there is anyway a lot to be said for simplicity. However, what is important, I think, is that all the essential elements of sadhana are brought in to make it fully effective and potentially an all-encompassing spiritual practice. And if they are not explicit in the written sadhana that we have, they need to be drawn out. And from the point of view of the Manchu Gosha Stuti sadhana, which Bhante received from Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, it's very helpful to us because all the elements of sadhana are there, they're explicit. In others, they are there, but they may not be explicitly stated in the written text. This happens to be the sadhana which Bhante gave me at ordination, the Manchu Gosha Stuti sadhana. And I was very fortunate that just 3 months after my ordination, in 1977, Bhante held a seminar at Padmaloka on this sadhana, which remains for us a foundational text on the essential element of all sadhanas. So soon I'm going to move on to what I really would like to also talk about, a suggestion of what are these essential elements from my understanding of sadhana. I think there are just a few more points to be made regarding what we've been through, subsequent particularly to reimagining the Buddha, an initiation into a new life and where we are now. As I understand it, at least two principles from this exploration remain so important. Actually, lots of principles remain important, but I want to mention two in particular here. One is that whatever practice an order member takes on, whether at ordination or later on, needs to emerge from and be related to our unfolding spiritual experience. And secondly, to make it possible that sadhana, as we understand it and as we practice it, we can actually practice it faithfully. It's something that we can actually do. And preferably, very much, keep connection with it on a daily basis. So that remains important. It's also important, I think, definitely, to be aware that there are not a few order members who do not engage with sadhana, not at least as a meditation practice. How many? Well, it's difficult to say, but there are many. And that may simply mean that they do not engage with sadhana in the limited sense of a traditional sadhana, but they find other ways to connect with the transcendental goal. And this may include a very strong connection with a mantra or a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva. In the ordination vows, there is of course reference to chanting the sacred mantras. It's not the vows. It is the vows. Or it's not, but it's within the ceremony. That was a mistype. In the ordination ceremony, there is reference to chanting the sacred mantras. So here, mantra in the first place does refer to the Buddha, a Buddha, or Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But, however, as we find in a note by Subhuti in Initiation into a New Life, Bhante also considered that the term could be applied to the recitation of the three refuges, and the like, that serve the same function as connecting one with the Buddha and his enlightenment. So, Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sangham saranang gacchami. We can see it like a mantra in the same way as the mantras, the other mantras of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So, and again, in the groups, you might want to consider how all order members can practice sadhana faithfully and effectively, and how this may look differently in different cases. Finally, I just want to mention that I do know that recently Subhuti has been revising Initiation into a New Life to bring it up to date with the experiences of the last few years, subsequent to reimagining the Buddha and initiation into a new life, and to reflect Bhante's latest thinking and also that of the college. In a way, it does seem like we've come full circle, more or less, to the way practices were given at ordination in the earlier days. And I know from conversations that for quite a few this has been a bit confusing. And however, I also know that quite a few have said that they have gained a lot from this exploration, and they feel we do not end up in quite the same place. So anyway, if you wish, that's something that you could also touch on in your groups. So, in the remaining part of my talk, I want to, at least in outline, go through what I understand to be essential aspects of sadhana. I've come up with 14. they all require several talks in themselves, and they certainly, the order in which I give them could be organised a bit differently, though where we start, in a way, I think where we start is renunciation. That's where we start. And that's very clear in Manju Gosha Stuti Sadhana. The text asks us to generate powerfully a mood of renunciation and great compassion. And sometimes when I practice the Manju Gosha Stuti Sadhana, I stay with this for quite a long time. Sometimes I don't. It is so rich just to cultivate and explore a mood of renunciation that I could spend the whole hour just doing that. And yes, it seems that renunciation, the theme, the dwelling in it, it is so rich and liberating from the start. And this, of course, is one of the first of the three principles of Buddhism according to Tsongkhapa. The three principles being renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. And I find that one way to look at sadhana, that's what it's about. These three great teachings, renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. And to look for a way to bring these three themes through sadhana from beginning to end. Probably most of us are familiar with the admonishment of Geshe Drom in the Precepts of the Gurus to the monk who was carrying out all sorts of spiritual practices. And he said something like, "This is all very good, but it'd be better if you actually did something spiritual." And after various exchanges with the increasingly confused monk, Geshe Drom exclaimed 3 times and loudly, "Give up on this life." And I think that's where sadhana starts. Give up on this life. Give up false refuges so that we can go for refuge to the 3 jewels. Because, of course, where there is renunciation, that makes, with the other side of renunciation, what we move away from, as it were, is what we move towards, and that is the 3 jewels. And I think this is a large part of why we do not give sadhana until ordination. Because sadhana goes with the point at which someone is able to actualize effective going for refuge. And yes, I saw this on the 1-month retreat just recently. And importantly, from ordination onwards, when we do sadhana, it always connects us with our ordination. And we can consciously recollect that when we do sadhana. So as I've said, and this is my second essential element, but it is actually implied by renunciation, the second essential element is going for refuge. It's turning towards the Buddha. It's Buddhanusmriti. And when I can, I like to start sadhana by recollecting the qualities of the Buddha. So whether I might be practicing the Manju Gosha Stuti Sadhana, or as I have more recently been doing also the Green Tara Sadhana, when I can, when I have time, when I have the discipline or the feeling, I like to call to mind the Buddha in all his 3 kayas. Well, that's always implied when we call to mind the Buddha. And so here I remind us what Bhante says in his Buddhophony, those points. The archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that emerge later in Buddhist history are all to be understood as hypostases or imaginative embodiments of the Buddha's enlightened experience and qualities. They cannot therefore be truly understood without there first being a deep understanding of and feeling for the Buddha of history. People should be encouraged to focus their practice on the historical Buddha, not the archetypal figures, until they have developed this appreciation. So I suppose that, well, first of all, just to mark, it is a wonderful thing to take up the sadhana of Buddha Shakyamuni and to practice that for the rest of one's spiritual life. At the same time, if one has got the connection with the Buddha Shakyamuni, which one would hope to have by the time of ordination, one can take up other, and we do take up, the meditation on other figures. So the third element I've already mentioned is bodhicitta. So running right through all sadhana is the basis of metta and the Brahmaviharas. It's important, I think, at the outset, as with any spiritual practice really, whether it's a mindfulness of breathing or sevenfold puja or our daily work and life, to establish the altruistic context. That we approach sadhana, this all-encompassing spiritual practice, for the benefit of all. That we wish that all may be rewarded by the blessings that come from sadhana. And in some sadhanas this is explicit. For example, in the Green Tara sadhana, where, as we'll see this afternoon, if you are not familiar with the sadhana, many of you will be, blessings go out from our heart at a certain point towards the end of the practice, meditation practice, but it can be outside of meditation too, of course. Blessings, rainbow blessings or light blessings go out from our heart to all beings. Or in the Vajrasattva sadhana coming from the Mula Yogas, where we imagine all beings with Vajrasattva above their head. So just as we are purified by Vajrasattva, all beings are purified. So it's never just us with the yidam. The yidam is always giving their love and compassion and wisdom to all beings. And we are, when we are open and receptive, we are able to receive their blessings too. So the fourth element is Shunyata Emptiness. And this connects very strongly, of course, with the sixth element practice. And this was, of course, the central practice for Bhante in his teaching. It has its origins in the Pali Canon, in the Dutta Vibhanga Sutta, and was regarded by Yogi Chen as a fundamental practice for removing the poison of ignorance. At Guhyaloka, I was reading through parts of Yogi Chen's meditation, systematic and practical, which is a quite extraordinary work. I had not realized how hugely knowledgeable Yogi Chen was in all kinds of ways, in all aspects of life, both meditational and other ways. And I came to see, more than I had realized before, what an important figure Yogi Chen was for Bhante. And actually I have found over the last few years occasionally, I or others asking Bhante questions, well, where did that come from? I think it was probably Yogi Chen, or it was Yogi Chen. He's a very, very important teacher for Bhante. And sixth element practice was very much, it was a practice that he regarded as absolutely central, the central practice actually, for the poison of ignorance. Where there's one of the weeks where Bhante went for the talk, or for the part of the talk, and where he talks about the five poisons. So the sixth element practice. And of course Bhante has that's what we're familiar with in the order, the 5 poisons and the 5 practices, the 6th element. So at Guhyaloka in the month of September, I was very, very much struck by how effective, and I would even say, I will say also powerful, the 6th element practice is. Of all the 12 who were ordained, all of them reported that the 6th element practice was extraordinarily effective, and they reported all kinds of very, very strong understandings, one could even say insights. So, yeah, we're familiar with bringing in whatever we've gleaned from 6th element practice, of course from other insight practices, so-called insight practices. Although, of course, the distinction between insight and non-insight is not a very real one, as we know, but at least a shorthand, other practices. We bring it in at the start of the sadhana, or maybe not at the start, after cultivating renunciation and bodhicitta, with the blue sky, if that sort of imaginatively leads to that sort of sense of openness and emptiness. We ourselves are either dissolved into the blue sky, or we experience ourselves as just made of light, made of energy. But it's never us looking at emptiness. We are in emptiness. We are part of emptiness. It is emptiness of self. It is emptiness of the dharmas. It is emptiness of self. And in the Manchu Gosha Stuti Sadhana, Bhante talks about what he calls the Maya way, where we see what appears before us as both vividly appearing and empty of substantiality. And not just what appears before us, but we ourselves. And this is quite explicit in Bhante's teaching, that we experience ourselves as a sort of mass of vibrating energy, which kind of is a way into experiencing ourselves as in the sixth stage of the 6th element practice. And I just want to give one more quotation from Bhante, from the Bodhisattva ideal, which for me I felt was very helpful in explaining the relationship between the world of appearance and the world of emptiness, which of course, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And the relationship between the 6th stage of the 6th element practice, the consciousness stage, and the preceding 5 stages. So I'll read what Bhante says when he's actually talking about the 6th element practice in the chapter which is published in the Bodhisattva Ideal, where he's talking about the 5 poisons. So Bhante says, the physical universe isn't excluded from this infinite consciousness, but it doesn't constitute a barrier to it. It is as though one's consciousness goes through it. It is not that something literally isn't there, that was there before, but it is no longer seen as an obstacle. It becomes transparent, as it were. The 6th element practice, leading as it does to this perception of reality, is a direct negation of one's usual grasping, ego-based tendency. It helps one to dissolve the idea of one's own individuality in the narrow sense of the word, and thus destroys the poison of conceit, which of course is the purpose of the 6th element practice. And of course the figure appears out of emptiness and goes back into emptiness, but as we've seen and know, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So now, coming on to the 5th aspect, it is in most sadhanas, it is explicit, including in the simplified sadhanas, which Subhadra and others, under Bhante's guidance and at his request, put together in 1993, the seed, the head, throat and heart center, the Om Ah Hung, is explicit. And that's because this is an element, these sometimes called the three Vajras. That's because this is, as I understand it, an element of the Tantra that Bhante has brought in, or that is in our sadhanas. Because of course there is an extent to which we are practicing from the Tantra, even though they are not within the context of Tantric initiation. And the head, throat and heart center, they represent the total engagement of ourselves, body, speech and mind. And this is experienced psycho-physically or spiritually. It is actually something that enables the whole of our being to be engaged and to be engaged in contemplating the Buddha or Bodhisattva. So, the most important thing is the engagement, whether it is done in that way or not. The sixth aspect is the lotus. So, yes, it's quite often said in a written sadhana to reflect on the significance of the lotus. So, like with all of this, that is the point, is it not, that we need to reflect. We need to come to a deep understanding beyond the conceptual, beyond the rational, deep in the fibre of our being. I think a pointer for me of the lotus, it represents, in a certain sense, the discontinuity of the conditioned and the unconditioned. In a certain sense, it represents the arising of the transcendent. When I see the lotus before me, I feel now the transcendent, as it were, is appearing. So that's how I think of it. And this connects with the seventh aspect, which is the Samaya Sattva, who then becomes the Jnana Sattva. So Samaya, it can either mean oath-bound or it can mean conventional. And so the Samaya Sattva is the Buddha or Bodhisattva, how they appear when we evoke them. Evoking being different to invoking in a certain sense, as Bhante has suggested. So when we evoke the Buddha or Bodhisattva before us, we think, well, how they look, whether we see it visually or not. And they, maybe we see visually, maybe we feel a sense of them. The oath-bound aspect is that if we do that, we will reap the benefits. The conventional aspect is that it is not yet the Buddha or Bodhisattva in actuality. It is the form ready to receive the Buddha or Bodhisattva in actuality. And here we bring in so much about sadhana that I'm only just going to touch on very, very briefly, because first of all you are familiar with this, and secondly there is not time. Here the special faculty of the imaginal is essential. It's another faculty to an ordinary sort of way of seeing the world conventionally. We wish to see everything as significant. hand gestures, mudras, implements, clothing, ornaments, auras, and so on. And we try to take in what we see directly, without thinking about it too much. We try to, if we think about these things outside of the meditation, then when we go into it, we can just sort of directly respond to the symbols and to the images. I was reading earlier this year from Genesis to the Dharma Sutra, a book that Bhante wrote in 2005. He dictated it, actually. He was not able to see by then. About Western Buddhist encounters with Christianity. And here, I was very struck where Bhante talks about a depiction of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, which he visited in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie, Milan. And this is what he writes. I find it difficult to believe that Leonardo drew from the head of a model. And this is the face of Jesus. So this is the face. He says, I find it difficult to believe that Leonardo drew from the head of a model. However much he might have idealized the features, Leonardo must have sought and found that beauty and celestial grace in the depths of his own soul. I was very, very struck by this. And I thought, yes, this is what we want to do in sadhana. This is what I want to do in sadhana. When I look at the face of Manchu Gosha or Tara or the Buddha or whoever, I want to see from the depths of my own soul. It is no earthly beauty. So this brings us well to the eighth element, which is the aspect of devotion. Devotion. So in a number of sadhanas, this is very, very explicit. It's very explicit in the green Tara sadhana, where a large part of the sadhana is devotion in the most beautiful, beautiful way to the bodhisattvas. And it's also explicit in the Manchu Gosha Stuti Sadhana, where we see Manchu Gosha himself invoking the five jhanas, and the five jhanas pouring down their blessings, the jnana amrita, the nectar of wisdom. So somehow in our sadhanas this is quite essential, and we need to, and I'm sure we bring it in, and indeed right through. If we're a little bit lost, what are we doing? Devotion. If we're kind of distracted, not connected, devotion. Not just, aspects of devotion, longing to see the Buddha, longing to see the Bodhisattva, reverence, wonder, awe. When I think of awe, I think of what I experience almost always when I go into a huge cathedral. You go in there and this is anyway what it does for me, and it's completely, it's not the Christian context, though I'm not really thinking about that, but the size, the wonder, the amazement even that this could be created, let alone the aesthetic beauty. It's a sense of awe that, again, one is hoping for in relationship to the Buddha and Bodhisattva. And this brings about openness and receptivity and trust. The trust is that we can completely trust the Buddha or Bodhisattva. The Buddha or Bodhisattva is for us at this point a true refuge. They will never let us down. They're completely reliable. So in the practice we try to open ourselves completely to their influence. And this is how the many blessings of sadhana comes. We'll come back to that in a moment. So ninthly, the seed syllable and the mantra. Well, as I already mentioned, the seed syllable is regarded as the Buddha or Bodhisattva. And sometimes, or in the case of Shakyamuni Muni, his emblem. And if you repeat the mantra regularly, the energy or the mantra related to the seed syllable is either at the end of the mantra maybe, or the mantra is revolving around the seed syllable either clockwise or anti-clockwise. The energy increases, the spiritual energy increases, and eventually repetition becomes spontaneous, continuing without a conscious effort. And it's significant, well, at least it is the case, that the last piece of writing that Bhante did, completed 3 weeks ago, was a word on the mantra yana. Yeah, that was completed 3 weeks ago today. I just checked that this morning. So 10thly, purification. I think this comes from our openness and receptivity. We show ourselves fully to our yidam with all our faults and indeed with all our qualities. We don't wish to hide anything. When we say, for example, that in wisdom, seeing all things as they really are, the Buddha or Bodhisattva sees us as we really are. And we want them to see us as we really are. And we can, and I do in my sadhana practice, consciously bring a poison that might be predominant into the practice. So it might be, suppose I'm feeling envy. So bring it in and let it be purified. And that purification is both the emotional, the transformation of the qualities of the Buddha and Bodhisattva that transform the envy, hopefully, into maybe calmness, maybe metta, at least it sort of dissolves it, but also the cognitive obscuration that sees it as empty, insubstantial, that cuts to its root. Sometimes I brought in the poison of distraction, and that is very helpful, because if you can make some headway on distraction, then you won't be distracted in the sadhana. So we can make ourselves more receptive to the Buddha or Bodhisattva. So, yes, this is something to keep going both inside and outside of meditation. So 11th, yes, I've already mentioned it, the blessings. There's not a lot to say here, except that the core of what is happening here is our devotion, our receptivity, and all this openness to the Buddha or Bodhisattva. And when we do that, the blessings that come down. And these blessings purify the klesha and gnaya, the emotional and cognitive obscurations. And imaginatively, they purify not only us, but all beings. And 12th, just sitting samadhi. And this is very, very important. At the end of sadhana practice, there can be a culmination. In the Manchu Gosha Stuti sadhana, this is explicit. It is the culmination. But in every sadhana, we can do this. We sit absorbing or dwelling in the effect of all that we have done. And we sit for as long as we can, or time permitting and so on. But at least, if possible, for 5-10 minutes. And 13, dedication of merit. The sadhana, our practice, our spiritual lives, in and out of meditation, we want to cultivate that the motivation that whatever we do, whatever gain we get, we want to share. We immediately want to give it away. And 14, resolution and taking out the benefits, the impact, the effect into the rest of our lives. Well, that is from the point of view of meditation. When we've been meditating at the end, now we need to think about the rest of the day and the night. It's put in the Manchu Gosha Stuti Sadhana as bridging the gap. Actually, we need to bridge the gap both ways. We bridge the gap from meditation into daily life, and from daily life into meditation. We bring from meditation, from the sadhana, into our daily activity. We try to live out of renunciation and all that implies, bodhicitta and emptiness, imagination, devotion, and so on. So all this, as we had written about this weekend, this is amongst our many gifts from Bhante. Sadhana can encompass our whole Dharma life. It can be a doorway into a world of meaning and mystery, of insight and magic. And this gift of sadhana is, I feel sure, one of the manifold blessings given to us, gifted to us by Bhante Urgyen Sangharakshita. I am confident, I feel sure that these manifold blessings will rain down for all of us, even more strongly now that Bhante has finally passed away just 3 or 4 days ago. I feel sure, I feel confident that these blessings will rain down for many, many generations to come. And that the response that I have, and I am sure, in fact I see, that so many people have and are expressing, is gratitude. The gratitude that is being, I see, poured out over the last few days. It was very, very strong even while Bhante was alive. I had having the good fortune to be one of his secretaries. Stanashradha is sitting just next to me, and he even more. We had the good fortune to read, did we not? So many letters of gratitude to Bhante from all kinds of people coming just for just for a short period, people who just become mitras, people who just become ordained, people who have been order members for short times, people for long times, and also quite a few people who were not involved with Triratna, but still kept contact with Bhante, and who regarded him as, in some cases, the most important person in their life. So I've concluded my talk, and I'm going to finish by dedicating this talk to Bhante Urgyen Sangharakshita, to the order, to the future of Triratna. And I'm going to ask that we just finish in silence. Even if you may have appreciated the talk, no need for applause. So we can just dwell in that, whatever we may feel right now. Thank you.